Quinton, what's up, man? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so pumped to have this conversation.
Yeah, of course, me as well.
And where are you joining us from? What part of the world are you in again?
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina, as you might can tell.
That's right. And are you born and raised in North Carolina?
Yeah, born and raised. I've lived here. I'm 30 years old, so I've lived here all my life. Yeah, never lived in another state. So I only live about an hour and a half from where I was born. So
Wow. I got to get your skincare routine because you look great
yeah,
for
thank you.
30.
Appreciate it. This lighting's decent. So
But we're pumped to dive in today. We're going to talk about is your story, how you got into fitness, where you started off, how you start. We'll talk about social media. I want to share the story of Quinton and his journey to becoming a content creator. So I don't know where you think the best place is to dive in, but maybe the starting point is you clearly have a passion for fitness. Where did that start, and where did you pick up fitness in your life?
yeah, so I started lifting and coaching myself when I was just 15. So that was my eighth grade, ninth grade year. I couldn't tell you exactly when I started, looking back at pictures and stuff, but that's pretty much when I started. And originally it was just because I wanted to kind of lose some weight. I had two older brothers that made fun of me all my life for being a little bit chunkier of a kid. And so that was my pure motivation at the beginning of it. Obviously, being in eighth, ninth grade, I wanted abs as well to impress some girls and that type of thing. And that's where it stemmed from. So at this point, I've been lifting for 15 years, over half my life now that I'm 30. And it's obviously just, it's a passion that I've been able to build a business around, which I never expected when I was younger. I went 12 years before I ever competed or did anything with fitness. And so for me, it was always just that for me. And up until 3 years ago, it was that. And it's cool to help other people. And I'd always helped friends and family in the past, but 15 years later, I still have a love for it and still love being in the gym and obviously love helping other people do it as well. So
That's super cool. It is such an amazing thing to be a coach, and then you never could factor in 15 years ago where social media be today, and how you can reach so many people. But kind of on your journey, so you love fitness, that makes a ton of sense. And then what do you go to college for? I know out of college, I'd love to talk about what your first couple of jobs were, and kind of how you got here. But let's go there.
yeah, so I finished high school obviously at 18, and I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had always felt like, and I'd always told myself ever since I was a young kid, as early as I can remember, probably 9 or 10 years old, I always said that I would be a millionaire. I just didn't know how to get there, and that I wouldn't stop until I did get there. And so I turned 18. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had no direction. My mom was actually a single mom, and so she didn't have a lot of direction for me as far as like what to do with school because she hadn't finished college either. And so, I had a good friend tell me about the fire department, and he was like, you could work for 25 years and you get retirement and things like that. And I was like, well, that sounds great to me. So I started that, and I worked for the fire department for about 3 years. And then I realized that I wasn't making enough money. That wasn't going to get me to be the millionaire that I had always said I would be. And I didn't want to work two jobs my whole life. So I went back to school, saved up some money for the last 2 years that I was at the fire department so that I could afford to go back to school. I spent 2 years doing that, went through an x-ray program and then a CT program, and I worked in healthcare for the next 7 years until I was 29. So I've had a few different kind of big boy jobs and careers, and this one is obviously the one I'm most passionate about and the one that's the most beneficial, of course, because I get to work for myself and that type of thing. But yeah, I spent 10 years in two different fields that aren't related to health and fitness whatsoever. So complete shift for me in the last 2 years. It's been a complete turnaround. So
I love that. There's so many cool things about your story. One of the things I appreciate a lot is I remember first talking to you. You were like, "Hey, my goal is to become, financially independent, to kind of be able to transition out of this job." So you spent that last 8 years in healthcare, and then I'd say you had a. Why don't we talk about where you got the idea? Where you're like, "Hey, maybe my full-time job can be a creator." Like what year that was, and then I'd say you were pragmatic in the fact that you didn't kind of rush to do it right away. You built the skills, you built your brand, you scaled things a bit and scaled your income to do that transition. I'd love to hear some more details, how you thought about that.
For sure. So I turned 27. That was 2022. And I spent a lot of the beginning of that year just looking for something. I was working in healthcare at the time, but I just knew I felt like I was missing something. It felt like I was meant for more. And I knew I had more potential in me. And so, I was trying to start businesses on the side while working in healthcare. I was doing pressure washing and building planter boxes and just trying to find something to occupy the time that I had besides being in the gym and being at work. And nothing ever really gave me the fulfillment that I was looking for, truly. And so something bit me later that year, really, truly in about July, August of that year, and told me to compete. And I had never considered it before. I'd been in the gym for 12 years at that point, but I had never really been around the bodybuilding scene. I had never really been, in the bodybuilding scene very much. And so it was all new for me. But something overnight really told me to compete. My partner, Kinsey, actually pushed me to do it as well, and a good friend, Landon. They both kind of talked to me about it. And, my whole mindset shifted at that point for whatever reason. And so that is when I started prep for my very first show. And that's when I started posting on social media as well, just to document the process of that prep. And so things caught on really quickly. Within a couple of months, I was at 100,000 followers on TikTok. And that's when I realized that, like, this is what I was looking for the whole time, and that I could make a business out of the passion that I've had since I was 15. At that point, 12 years in, I'd never even considered it. It was never even a thought that came across my mind that I could actually make money from this passion. And so to come full circle, and be doing it full time now, 2 years later, 2.5-ish years later, is very cool to see. So obviously something that I'm super proud of, and something that that not many people get the chance to do. So open arms. I love it. It's working for yourself is obviously something that's, what you put in is what you get out, just with anything else. So that's how I got into coaching and social media.
So you're 5-6 years into this healthcare job, and then the first thing you do, so you start doing a bodybuilding competition, and then you're like, I want to document my journey.
Yep.
And you start posting that content on TikTok.
Yep. That's where it started, TikTok. And then I didn't actually post anything to Instagram for a couple of months. I wish I would have. Probably would have grown that a whole lot faster as well. But it took me maybe 3 or 4 months of posting to TikTok before I started to post to Instagram as well. And obviously you can post everything to every platform. I just didn't take advantage of that up front, but still worked. So
did you put a lot of thought in, some creators are just like, hey, I'm going to go kind of, very common story that you hear, which I love, and you're kind of saying here, is they're like, so you start off just by documenting your journey. You don't necessarily have all the skills and understand all the edits and all the hooks and all that stuff. You just start posting, sharing your journey. And that might not be what you did in this case, but I would love to understand the level of kind of rigor. Maybe rigor is the wrong word. I'd say your depth of your understanding of how social media worked at that point, where you're just like, I kind of looked at it. I see some stuff doing, I'm sharing my journey, or I spent a lot of time studying. Like, what was your mindset, and how much did you know when you first started?
I would say up front, because I really had never followed anybody. I didn't, I had 2 or 3 people in the fitness realm that I looked up to, but beyond that, I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about content and how to create it and how to edit. But I've always been somewhat creative. And so I knew that, I could put my own spin on certain things, and obviously studying other people's content to get inspiration, but also, falling back on my older content as well. But obviously initially it's just about seeing what other people do and how to go about doing that, and kind of tapering it to what you feel like works the best for you. For me, I feel like being multifaceted is one of the most important parts of being on social media. You can't just post one type of content. And so I knew that very quickly up front, that I couldn't just post the physique every single day. If I didn't provide some type of emotion, whether that meant, something informative or something that inspired, or even just something that, it has to provide some sort of value on some level. It has to make the consumer feel some type of way about it, whether that's even hatred about it. It doesn't really matter. It just they need to feel something. And if you can't make or invoke an emotion out of someone, they're not going to connect with that post. They're not going to like that post. They're not going to comment on that post. And so one of the things that I did very early on was I would ask myself, if I was the consumer watching this piece of content, what am I getting out of it? do I feel anything out of it when I watch it back? Does it do anything for me? And if that wasn't the case, then it probably wasn't something that I would have wanted to post. But with social media, everything's random. The algorithm can hit you at 10 different times, 10 different days. And the post you posted today could have done 10 times the views tomorrow, and you can't control it to a certain extent. But there's some key fundamentals that you obviously need to have in each post to even give it the chance of doing that. So
I love it. I love how you went into how does this make someone feel? There is a depth to social media. I think you nailed it where, you know, part of starting off as a creator, you're like, hey, I'm just going to post some stuff, but you want to get your mindset in. Does this, am I creating something that actually helps people or makes people feel something? And while the algorithm is somewhat, you could say there's elements of it where it's a lottery ticket, what you do see over and over again, any post that goes viral generally has something rooted in it that hit users psychologically and hit on a deeper emotional level. It's not just the fact that it's the algorithm. It's like there's something embedded in there to learn. And I think it's really cool that you basically picked up on that right away.
yeah, and I think there was obviously a few other things that probably went into that as well. You can't just be the normal guy. You have to have something that sets you apart. Otherwise, what are people really looking for in you? And so for me, obviously, there was a few things that I think were pretty crucial in the healthcare scene or health and fitness scene online. I would say that realistically, there's not a ton of people out there that look like me. And so just in a general sense, there's a few things that set me apart. And that was number one, the way I looked at the height that I am, being a shorter guy. There's not a lot of us out there, especially that actually post about it, because number one, it's a confidence thing. Most people just don't think they have it. But number two is, people are just scared to put themselves out there too. So the amount of people that just physically look like me online is a very small portion, especially just the mustache and different aspects to it. I like to think that I'm a somewhat attractive individual as well, and I think that all that has to play into it. At the end of the day, you can still make plenty of get a great following even if you don't have those things, but you need to have something to set yourself apart. So whether that's with the content or how you communicate, how you community build, what type of post you like posting, and all of this plays into things. So there's a big learning curve, but there's a very quick route to fixing a lot of those issues. And yeah, so I think just having a general good mindset about things and how people operate and what you feel like you needed maybe when you started would be a huge aspect of things too. Is you could give that to people that are just starting out as well. So
Love that, man. Your content, the mustache, I'd say, is the cornerstone. But I love the mustache.
it definitely helps. Yeah, there's not many people with it, and I always tell people when they recognize me outside or just like at the gym or wherever, they're like, "Hey, man, is your name Quinton?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's Quinton." I was like, "It's hard to mistake this mustache, man. Like, you ain't gonna find it anywhere else." So it's usually always me. If you think it's me, it's probably me.
You're gonna have to start posting about tips on how to have such a good one. You're so cool because you're confident. You're so relatable. You do such a good job of sharing your story, and I love your flashbacks of when you were a kid or you were a firefighter or the other things you're in. It's there's no doubt that that the customer and the follower is loaded with limiting beliefs, and your content does such a great job of helping say, hey, I was just like you, and you know, all that. So I really applaud what you do. And then, so on your journey, you start posting, you get TikTok. I love the way you look at the world. You're a smart guy, and you go for it. You were still years out before you considered leaving your job. So you get a following. I'd say let's talk about what your following was, where you started monetizing. What was the first thing you started monetizing? How did that go? How did you feel about that? And then let's go from there.
Yep. So started posting in August of 2022. Uh, about 4 or 5 months later, I was at the 100K on TikTok. So that was basically the end of the year, about December. That's when I originally started posting on Instagram as well. Within a few months, I was at 100K on Instagram as well. So like March-ish timeframe. But I would say that I first started to make any type of money whatsoever from social media, at least significant. There might be a $50 roll in here or something like that with like something small, but actually making a couple $100 off of something a month is kind of when I would determined that it was somewhat profitable. And so that started to happen for me as early as January, February, within about 6 months of posting. And I was already, like I say, I was already making a little bit here and there, but I didn't start one-on-one coaching until January, and my app also started in November or December. So it started to produce some income around that same time frame, January-ish. So about 5 to 6 months in, and I would say, it's obviously dramatically different from where it is now because I'm 2.5 years in now. So another 2 years of growth. It really took me a good year and a half of actually making realistically more than I was making in healthcare to accept that I could do this long term. And for me, I've just always been a very concrete type person. And so I needed to see that it was a long term benefit for me to justify leaving work because, in my perspective, I worked both for a year and a half. I was doing 80 to 90 hours a week editing and, working the full-time job in the healthcare. I was an 8 to 5er. And so, I was doing 80 to 90 hours a week for a good year and a half. And it took me at least that long before I truly accepted that I could continue to do that. And so I've been home full time for a little over a year. I left my full time job last May, and the nail in the coffin for me was I needed to replace my healthcare income before I could justify it. And I'd already done that by about 2 or 3 times. But Kinsey, my partner, had just finished nursing school. And so when she needed to get her full time job, obviously, she got hired on. I gave it about a month or two and then I quit. So once that income was replaced, I felt super comfortable and I had to take the leap because at the end of the day, no one was going to do it for me. And I was the only one that could. So I figured if there was ever a time her income replaced mine, and it just made sense. So yeah, it took me 2.5 years before I did it.
I love that. Some folks like, hey, it's an overnight thing. It's no, it's you get in, you start doing better, you're fine, start making money, you improve. You start laying the foundation. So you replace your income a couple of times. It had to feel good the day you quit. The one thing I'd say about you reflecting on that time, I remember talking to you, was you were always really sharp. You did your homework though. I would say more so than the average creator. For you, like, hey, I want to do subscription and do a good job with subscription. I remember one of our first conversations. You like really studied. Like you seem like you're a student of the game where you're studying what's on social from a monetization standpoint, the products that you sell. You're looking at what the best guys are doing. You're kind of breaking that down, putting it into a game plan in your head, and then executing on it. It seems like you're pretty methodical in that regard.
For sure, yeah. I mean, obviously looking through people's link trees and, obviously just their links in their Instagrams and things like that to just see what their offerings looked like. Because obviously coming from a healthcare background, I had no clue how to position myself and do the things that I wanted to do. And so, I mentioned earlier the 2 or 3 people that I really followed up front when I was younger, when I first started in just bodybuilding and just in the gym, was one guy in particular named Julian Smith. And so his subscription based platform was something that I modeled mine after. And I knew that people would want daily updates. They don't want a specific program that may last, 8 weeks, because then what do they do at the end of that 8 weeks? And so I studied a lot on what I felt like worked and what I could see would work. But I also knew that people needed a community. They needed a space to be able to share their story because that's what everyone wants. They want to be heard, they want to be listened to, and they need a place to be able to do that. And so very early on, I created a Discord community for my subscription-based service. So that way they had a place to share their experience, but also to talk to me. And so I think that was a huge piece of the success was just having that place for them very quickly up front before anything else was even set up. So the one-on-one coaching and stuff is a completely different story. Obviously, you're talking to that individual on a one-on-one basis. But for a low ticket subscription based service, you really need to have a ton of value across the board. And so I try to put as much value into that program as I can, because if something takes a bit of time off of me, time is money at the end of the day. And if I have to answer a question that I could answer very easily by creating a nutrition guidance booklet or something similar, or just give that guidance very quickly up front and give direction, then they don't have to second guess where they need to go. And they don't really have to ask questions that I need to answer anymore because I already answered them in an easier way that is less time consuming than it would have taken if they had to answer it or ask and then me answer it, if that makes sense. So, um, building things out in a way that saves you time at the end of the day is going to mean a whole lot more, especially if you can provide that value in the same way, or more. So
And yeah, you do such a good job. You seem like such a student of the game. And then let's talk about today. So, last couple of questions here. You've you've had a great story to get where you are, full-time content creator. Um, and we'll talk about your social strategy today in a second. But I'd say, what gets you, you know, is it kind of you're in the game right now and you're excited to be in the game? Is there something you're looking forward to now as the next step? Like, how do you think about what excites you today? That type of thing.
yeah. So there's obviously, short term and long term goals that I have for myself. I try not to think too long term because I'm the type of person that I get a little obsessive over certain things. And so focusing on one goal at a time is the most important part. And so for me right now, that's just continuing to build my business. And the best thing that I can do for that is to go through another bodybuilding prep and, make sure that I produce good content around that prep so that people can see the proof of concept that I know exactly what I'm doing and that I could also help them. And, just being confident and comfortable in those positions is where you're going to build that concreteness and kind of secure yourself into this space. And so that's what I like to think about is that, every day that I put out that next piece of content and everything that I add on to this repertoire of things that I have and skills that I have is another day that I'm concreting myself into this position so that it can't go anywhere. Because one of my biggest fears up front, and the reason that it took me so long to leave my full-time job is because I felt like, and I still feel like to some degree, that in a snap of a finger, that this could be taken away from me very quickly. And I know that that's not truly the case, but if I tell myself that sometimes, it'll at least push me to, do the things that I need to do and, gives me the motivation to continue every day. And one of the things that I've really come to the realization with is that not everything has to be perfect. There's never going to be a perfect video scenario. Like you're not going to have a perfect filming scenario and picture scenario and those types of things. So you have to put the content out regardless, even if it's not perfect. You try to make it the best you can, but at the end of the day, you can't control every situation. So everything's not going to be perfect, but you still need to put the content out. And I know that if I post 4 or 5 reels a week, that my page will not decline. It will continue to go up, whether that's at 2% a week or 10% a week. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's still going to go up. So as long as you put out the content, it's going to go. As long as it's decent, of course. You got to account for that too. So
I feel like that's a great bumper sticker. As long as you, as long as you put out the content, it's gonna go.
yeah, it is what it is. As long as it's not terrible content, then you have the chance of hitting an algorithm and that video doing very well. And sometimes I can spend 5 seconds editing a video, and sometimes I spend 5 hours editing a video, and that 5-second video might do better. And that's just the case of social media, and that's why you need to increase your chances of potentially hitting that jackpot and getting a viral video is by putting out a ton of content because you never know which one can do well.
The strategy that I love that you do that I really wish every creator would do, and of course it's a little easier said than done, is the build in public where you're prepping for a show, or whether you're prepping for a show or not, you're documenting your journey, you're putting yourself through it, there's a lot of personal growth that goes into that, etc. And it just makes it fun. It makes it super informative. It's like a limiting belief zapper where it's just like, watching you put on mass and then to cut, and it's just like you're kind of cornering any excuse someone could have type of thing. I think it's such a great strategy. It seems like it works so well for you, and it seems like the audience, the community just really appreciates going on that journey with you.
Yeah, I think my content has obviously shifted a lot as I started versus where it's at now. I mean, obviously when I first started, the skill was just completely different. The content was much shorter. It was much quicker attention span type content. just to grab people's eyes because they didn't know me yet. And, I needed to be able to do that. And so I let the physique do a lot of the heavy lifting up front, which is just, is the way that it needed to be up front. But now I couldn't continue the page on just posting the physique every day. It just wouldn't work. People would get very quickly tired of that. And so you need to give your followers something to follow. If they don't have a story or something to, follow along with, or at least just kind of get an idea of what they should be doing, then what do they need you for? And at the end of the day, like, as much as you like to think that you could be friends with as many people as you have following you, and they might think the same thing, you've got to put out good content that they can actually connect with and get something from, because they're not just going to continue to follow you because they think you might be friends. They need something of value.
For sure. You really do think about the depth, and I love how you keep going back to, am I giving value? Am I touching emotion? That is the right way to think about it. And last question for you. So if you were to give your 25-year-old self some advice now that you're out there, you've taken the leap, you've learned, you really understand the game well, what would you tell someone coming up who wanted, let's say they have a couple thousand followers, they really want to become a full-time content creator, that build digital businesses so they can work from home and kind of work from anywhere, that type of thing? What advice would you give to folks?
Yeah, so there's I have actually 3 pieces of advice, and I kind of thought about this a little bit. I thought you might ask this question, and so I took a little bit of notes. So first and foremost, the thing that I still struggle with the most, and that I would have told myself as soon as I started, was talk to the camera. I still struggle with it. I set that camera up and my mind goes blank. I set that camera up and I start getting tongue-tied. And I'm a pretty confident individual. I feel like I am, at least. And I don't usually have issues communicating. But when that camera comes up, it happens to me. And, it's something that is a skill, just like anything else. It's just as much of a skill as editing is a skill, or posting something, or coming up with a caption, or brushing your teeth. It doesn't matter. It's all a skill. And so you need to build on that skill. And the only way to do that is to practice it. No skill was acquired by not doing it. You're never born with just straight talent. You had to practice something at some point to be good at it. And so talking to the camera was something that I still struggle with, and something that I will probably continue to struggle with until I practice that skill more. And so that's the first piece of advice. Talk to the camera early. Doesn't even matter if you're talking to no one, you don't even care to post this. Just talk to the camera and get used to it. One of the things that I've been doing this week, because I want to get more into long form YouTube content, is just sitting down and just talking to myself out loud as if the camera was rolling. And then that way, when the camera does start to roll again, when I am ready to film, I at least feel slightly more comfortable with doing it. So that's the first piece. Second piece goes back to the community thing. If you feel like you want this to be a long-term thing for you that you can potentially provide for your family or your lifestyle for, then you need to obviously be able to produce the income to do that. And the only way to really keep people around and continue paying for a service goes back to this community. If they don't have a place to share their story and a place for you to be able to listen to them, they're not going to stay with you just because they can. They're going to go find someone else who does have a community that they can share their story with and experience things with other people. Humans are herd animals, and we like to be in a community. It is as simple as that. We settle, with communities, and it's usually a very tight situation. We as humans don't want to be by ourselves, and people don't want to go through their fitness journey by themselves either. Third thing goes back to the skills thing, and this kind of goes along with the first one, just talking to the camera, but every single portion of it, the captions, the text at the first part of the screen, the sound choice, the editing, how tight you can get the clips, all that stuff, it is all a skill. And it's just a skill that you have to practice. So practice the skills early, figure out how to edit, figure out how to do these things very quickly, because you can't pay someone to do every portion of it. I have 10 different roles within my, job. I am the only one employed by my own business, and those 10 roles have to be filled by me. I'm the filmer, I'm the editor, I'm the poster, I'm the captioner, and everything else in between. So Practice the skills.
Amen, brother. That was wonderful. Uh, that was so well said. Well, thank you for preparing for that, and that was great wisdom to share. That was really good. Um, um, well, man, this has been awesome. I'm so grateful for your time. This is gonna be a fun one to share. But keep on doing whatever you're doing and inspiring us. And I'm just grateful for your time today, man.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. It's you guys have played a crucial role in my success as well, and gave me hands on very early to help me position the things that I positioned, and truly grateful for it. So appreciate you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, brother. That's awesome. That's kind of you to say. Thank you so
Good
much.
deal.